On this episode, I spoke with Brooklin Nash, the founder of Beam Content, about content marketing, and we dove into what content marketing looks like in 2024, how to get more data driven with your content, and we even dove into an example with metadata about a benchmarking report that was super interesting. So let's dive right into this episode. Here, we'll just get started. So, as we get started, I do want to give you a chance to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about the path that led you to Beam, and kind of what you're most focused on right now.
Yeah, all good questions. It was a long path to Beam. I started out as straight out of my master's degree as a freelance writer. So I was a freelancer for 7 years, and it's kind of all over the map. I worked with e-commerce companies, B2B, B2C, product descriptions, SEO, case studies, and just slowly over those 7 years, it narrowed into a focus on B2B and those selling into looking at moving up market, those who are selling larger deals with a higher ACV. And for those types of clients, you need more strategic, more impactful content because you're not going to have a CFO or a CTO or CEO checking out an SEO article and converting from there. You need something that's going to really speak to them. I think that what doubled down during my 2 years. I was in-house at two different startups. The second of which was I headed up community content. So I spent a lot of time talking to sales leaders about what they were doing. And over the course of that year, I just realized, why should I, as a content marketer, pretend I know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about something I've never done? Why wouldn't I take the time to talk to the folks who've actually done it, whether that's a product manager or a CTO or a CRO, like at all different levels. You should just talk to the person who's actually doing the thing that you're talking about in the content. So we did that over the course of the year at this sales startup and then jumped out of that. And Sam, my co-founder, and I were both at that same startup. And we jumped out to start Beam with the idea that, look, what we did here, we can do for a lot of different B2B industries with a lot of different audiences. So that was kind of the kernel of Beam, is realizing that the impact of community-based content, which kind of by default becomes expert driven and data driven content.
Let's dive into that community based content. When you say that, what are the different appearances that that can take? What can that look like for different companies?
Yeah, we think of it as, I mean, your community is not the Slack channel that you set up or just the customer community. Like your community is your engaged audience. So that can be your internal folks, it can be your partners, it can be your customers, and it can be your ICP who are asking these questions and having these discussions. And it's just coming in a way where you can be a curator of those conversations rather than just speaking at these folks. So sometimes that is a dedicated community and you're bringing folks into Circle or Slack or a LinkedIn group or what have you, and using the conversations happening there to inform your content strategy. But at the very least, it's people first content. So you're talking to people who experts who your audience are already following and respect and trust, and using that for content rather than just speaking from the brand perspective or in the brand voice. So it just kind of creates this flywheel or circular effect of you're taking time to understand the questions people are actually asking. You're talking to people about the answers to those questions. You're turning that into more compelling and engaging content, and then using that to reach those folks. And it kind of just turns into this flywheel for you.
So I know that you focus a lot on content that dives deeper, content that is focused on customer insights, that requires inputs, requires whether it's survey data or going out and doing something like you mentioned earlier. Why that approach as opposed to going more the scalable content marketing route?
Yeah, good question. I don't want to say it's not scalable, but it is more time intensive, resource intensive, um, investment intensive to go this route. The why is because of the types of folks that we work with. The clients we work with have higher ACV customers. They have um, decision makers that are spread across the company. In the classic like Gartner image we've all seen where the buyer's journey has changed. And then there's the other one of how much time folks want to spend talking to sales versus how much time they want to spend doing research on their own or talking to their peers. We're trying to work with the folks who are targeting those types of prospects, where everyone from the procurement manager to the CRO is involved in the decision to make purchase. I think in those instances, taking the time and investing the resources in more impactful and engaging content really makes a difference because you're not going to convert those prospects by just scaling up a ton of SEO content, for example, because it's not going to be in depth enough or educational enough or engaging enough for your audience.
So can you think of an example recently or over time with Beam where you've worked with a company on a piece of content? I'd love to dive into kind of your process for, one specific piece of content, how you came up with the idea, how you actually went about creating it and why, everything in between that you'd be comfortable sharing.
Yeah. A couple of different examples, one that gets into data driven content and one that gets into expert driven content. One is with Metadata. 2 years in a row now with them, we've put out benchmark report for paid advertising on Facebook and LinkedIn. They've done a gated version, they've done an ungated version, they've tied it to their paid campaigns, they've tied it to nurture campaigns, they've given it to their sales team to use. Um, it's just a once a year benchmark report that we've worked on with them. But because it's original data based off of the marketing spend, the paid spend that Metadata customers have, uh, have spent on their platform over the past year, it's unique to Metadata. Metadata is the only one who has that data and really the only one putting out true benchmarks around advertising on Facebook and LinkedIn. Um, Off of that benchmark report, we also did a series of follow-up articles that went deeper into particular kind of long tail listings, benchmark for Facebook, benchmarks for LinkedIn, um, best design ideas for each one, CTAs for each platform, and so on. So I think by leaning on original unique data and B, digging deeper into the questions that a lot of folks are searching for, that one kind of series or packaged piece of content benefited everything from performance marketing. Our previous point of contact at Metadata said they could have turned off all their other paid campaigns for 6+ months, and that the benchmark report alone would have been enough to support those campaigns and driven leads to them. Um, and then by doing the follow-up articles, it wasn't even meant for SEO, but because we were digging into those granular long tail questions, they actually ended up doing really well on search. So now they're in the number one and number two spot for quite a few Facebook and LinkedIn advertising related questions. I don't think we could have done that if it was just like 11 best practices for LinkedIn advertising, like the more typical or traditional approach to content. The other example is we did a series with, actually we've done this a few times with different clients. We do a blank on blank series. So marketer hire on marketer hire, for example. And we sit down with internal folks and talk to them about how they use their platform for their function. So with one client, we did 6 different pieces like this. We talked to their PLG lead, we talked to their field marketing lead, we talked to their demand gen lead, and talked to them about how they were using their platform for their lead role. And did a series of 6 of these, ghostwritten and bylined by that person. And then as a follow-up, we also took those 6 and reconfigured and repackaged them into an ebook from the brand voice. What was essentially a more holistic guide to using their platform for marketing. And it went through each of those functions. So I think we were able to get more out of those interviews. It was, six 45-minute interviews that we were able to turn into 7 pretty impactful pieces of content. And B, we were able to get a lot more granular and specific about the how to than if we were doing our own research and not talking to the actual experts.
Why for the benchmark report, why do you think something like that resonated with Metadata's audience? Do you feel like that was fairly predictable, or were there even audiences that came from that or results that came from that that were unexpected?
I think it was expected. They're actually the ones that they knew they were sitting on this platform data and wanted to turn it into a piece of content. So we started working with them on it. I think it resonated because there's not a whole lot of guidance out there as specific as that. Like you can get into, you can Google best practices, but it's not as specific as when you're dealing with actual benchmark data of, okay, if you're just spinning up a new paid campaign on LinkedIn, what's the click-through rate you should be looking for? What CTAs should you prioritize? What should you put in your ad creative? All these questions were tackled within the benchmark data. So it wasn't just a report for report's sake that you can read and then go on your merry way. It's something that you can turn into a very tactical next step for yourself as somebody who's reading it.
So I'd be curious about this personally. Let's say you have somebody that comes into Beam and they're just kind of like a really vanilla client. They come in and they're doing literally everything that all of the other companies in their niche or in SaaS or whatever are doing. It's just blog posts and that's pretty much it. And their view of content marketing is blog posts. So they come to you to spice things up. Right now, what are kind of the opportunities you're looking at for companies like that to turn that on its head and actually do more interesting work with them?
Yeah, good question. I think there's two things that we nearly always recommend, especially if we're kind of starting at the base level. I think number one, sorry if I sound like a broken record, but it's all right, you're putting out a lot of content on these topics, but it's very surface level and it's very clear to anyone who has actually done the thing that this is a marketer writing about a thing they've never done. So let's take a step back and let's talk to your actual experts. Like if your target audience is an L&D leader, we should be talking to L&D leaders about these topics rather than just spinning our wheels and trying to come up with something on our own. Um, Actually, it's three things. So that's number one. Let's actually talk to the experts because you have them available. I've not come across a single company, prospect, or a client that does not have expertise, whether that's with your internal team, your platform partners, or even your customers. I think folks often turn to customers just for case studies and that's it. But you can talk to your customers about so much more. And I think you're going to get better engagement if you're not taking the typical problem, solution, outcome, case study approach. You're saying, hey, what's your playbook for this thing? And you're featuring them rather than your well, that was a little bit of a tangent. Um, I think number two is taking a step back to ask what we're talking about, why we're talking about it, and who we're talking to. So in our very first month with any new client, we call it the blueprint month for content strategy. So we talk to sales, we talk to customer success, we talk to the leadership team, we talk to our main point of contact, and then their kind of closest coworkers on the marketing team to get a full sense of who the audience is, what sales conversations look like, the pain points folks are running into, the objections they're raising, why people convert. And we turn that into a guide that informs the entire remainder of the year of content so that it's not scattershot approach to content. It's here's the 3 or 4 main themes that we want to hit on over the course of the year, again and again from different perspectives and all the topics under each of those themes. So it just brings kind of a cohesion and focus to content. Um, yeah. And then number three is just bringing more personality. So the typical approach would be blog posts with the either brand byline or the content marketer's byline and the brand page on social. But let's connect the dots between those things. And actually, I mean, the classic, it's maybe almost a cliche now is people buy from people, or even if it is B2B. So let's double down on that. What can we do with your CEOs or your CROs or your CMOs social presence so that you're building brand awareness through a personal account rather than just the brand account. Let's look at the bylines instead of it coming from the content marketer. If you're talking to salespeople, let's make it come from your VP of sales or your CRO. Um, and then connecting the dots between the two. Like if you have a podcast interview, you can turn that into an article. You can turn that into 12 different social posts. You can turn it into an email through your nurture. Like there's just so many different ways you can use one single conversation to get people to have that conversation.
I'm sure you've come across companies, founders, whomever, points of contact that are really into trends. And with B2B, there's always kind of like a lag between when everybody else is hopping on a trend and then it gets to B2B. So when they come to you and say like, oh, well, we need to do short form video now, is that what we have to focus all of our effort on? Or, AI is another one. Should we be scaling AI using programmatic SEO or whatever it may be? When these big trends come your way that maybe don't fit perfectly with either what you'd like to do, or maybe you feel like it's just not the best way to do content marketing, period. What are the discussions you have with people around this? And guess what are your thoughts around those trends?
Yeah, good question. I think my first two questions are always why they want to invest in that particular tactic or channel. And then honestly, the most important is who they're targeting to see if that tactic or channel makes sense. I don't usually try to dissuade prospects or just focus on networking calls from a particular course of action just because we don't offer it. If they, if they have an audience that is B2B to C, for example, they're serving e-commerce companies or retailers, then short form video probably does make a lot of sense. We don't do video production, but I can point them in the right direction. Um, in terms of it being a trend, I think marketers are so used to shiny object syndrome where it's, for a hot second, it was Clubhouse. And then it's, should we be on TikTok? And now what's the new one? Threads. Like, should we be looking at all these different channels? And my typical advice is let's make sure you have your foundation set on the channels you're on currently before we start chasing these other channels with tactics. It's like just lay the foundation.
On the AI front, how do you see that happening right now? Like AI for content marketing specifically, what do you trust it with, if anything? What do you not trust AI for? And how do you think the future unfolds between those two?
Yeah. I feel like I got to tread carefully here because you were at copy.ai, right?
No, don't tread carefully at all. Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I think it's super useful for a lot of things. But my other co-founder, Becca, heads up our operations and she leans on it all the time for building processes, for taking a transcript and turning it into a step-by-step how-to and generating ideas. And so I think it's very useful. I'm not like an AI critic. I think what gets problematic is when folks lean on it for A, for content strategy, and then B, for long form content execution. I think you can ask AI to help you with content strategy, but it's going to end up looking a lot like if you had leaned on just SEMrush or Ahrefs and we're basing all of your strategy solely on SEO instead of taking time to listen to customer interviews, talk to the customers yourselves, talk to your sales team, talk to your leadership team, get active on social or in communities to hear what people are talking about. Because there's going to be a huge lag with what AI is going to be able to put together for you in terms of strategy. It just needs to be human based. And then on execution, I've put it to the test with long form content. I tried a few different tools, ChatGPT and a handful of actual paid tools. And again, if you're talking to an informed buyer who is looking at spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars with you, AI is not going to cut it for creating the type of content that's going to speak to them. It's just going to end up sounding very generic. Honestly, the same way as if you had a SEO writer with 2 years of experience trying to write about this little pretty technical topic for a CPO or a CTO. Like it's just not, it's not going to land. Um, so it feel in terms of content execution for a particular type of audience, it feels like a little bit of a race to the bottom. It should not be about scale. It should be about impact.
Last question for you as we wrap up here. As you look back to the beginning of your career as a content marketer to now, what would be one thing that you would maybe do differently, or a shortcut that you see that you could have taken to kind of get where you are quicker? What's one piece of advice, I guess, that you would give yourself back then?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I'd say spending more time talking to folks who are not in your lane or within your function. So if you're a demand gen marketer, take time to learn from brand marketers and content marketers and field marketers, and even more extensively, talk to sales, talk to CS, the ones who are actually talking to the customers, right? Um, so yeah, like get outside yourself and take time to talk to folks who have a different perspective on marketing than you and are solving different problems than you. Because I think that's gonna help you do your job better and speak their language when it comes time to collaborate. Because what is marketing if not collaboration between people wearing a bunch of different hats?
Awesome. Well, Brooklyn, I appreciate you joining. Where's the best place for people to find you as we wrap up?
I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can just search for me there.